Hey, what's up, everyone? This is Isaiah from Player Development. So, a couple days ago, I sprained my ankle. It wasn't too bad. I walked it off, and the next day I was back in action. But that got me thinking, if I had a more serious ankle sprain, what should I do to treat it? Because I had seen my friend DJ, who's a physical therapist, he had posted a story talking about how the RICE method that all us athletes growing up learned about and practiced religiously was actually outdated, and that wasn't the best way to treat ankle sprains. So I decided to call him up, find out the best way to deal with those ankle injuries. Let's see what he's got to say. Hey DJ, thanks for joining me today.
What's up, Isaiah? How's it been, man?
It's been going good, man. So today we're talking about ankle injuries and kind of like twisted ankles, sprained ankles specifically. And I called you up because I saw a story on your Instagram, I think, where you said that the RICE protocol that all these athletes, all these trainers kind of grew up with is now outdated. So what's the story behind that?
Yeah, so I mean, even going back to PT school, which is 6, 7 years ago at this point, like that's kind of still what they were teaching us, like the Rice method, rest, ice, compression, elevation. And
Yep.
what we're finding now is that even the doctor himself that coined that, but he came out in 2015 and actually backtracked on his statement that, hey, listen, this might not actually be the best protocol, the best course of action for dealing with an ankle sprain. So it's constantly evolving, like everything in medicine and science. But yeah, the Rice method definitely is not something that I myself or many of the physios, chiros that I work with am in network with, help our athletes with. When you asked me to do this podcast with you, I just did a little bit of like back research and things like that. And a lot of these websites that you come across, whether it's a
Hmm.
physical therapy practice, a lot of them have these little blogs or articles about common injuries that they treat. And I would say safely that over 90% of them still have, like, if you are dealing with an acute ankle sprain, Rice is the method to go. So that's why I think it's so hard to get away from it, because that's what's most readily accessible to people when they type in, how do I treat an ankle sprain?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
one of the issues with the readiness of information, not all of it is good information.
Knowing that that's not the best way to treat these ankle sprains, what is a proper way for us to deal with that when we experience it?
I think the biggest thing, and I think it's research across the board, not even just with ankle sprains, but I think we are moving towards a approach to these injuries that early mobilization and early movement is usually the best course of action. But I would say, even in your experience, how many ankle sprains have you had that have been like super severe? Like, have you ever had to have surgery, or have you been booted or anything like that in the past?
No, nothing to that extent.
Right. So most of the ankle sprains that we see, and even in a clinical setting, are probably a less severe injury. It's not those higher end grade threes where you're seeing a complete tearing of the ligament. They're
Hmm.
usually low grade ones, if not a mild grade two. So a lot of it has to do with just graded exposure back to movement and activity. But a lot of times, if you go to an urgent care, or if you go to an emergency room, even if it is a slight sprain, because parents don't know any different,
Hmm.
athletes don't know what they just go to the first person that's readily available. A lot of times, even with a grade one, doctors will put kids in walking boots, or a crazy ankle brace, and say stay off it for a week, give them crutches. And that's literally the worst thing that we can do.
Hmm.
Bracing and immobilizing, especially a light grade one where they can still kind of put weight on it, is setting them up for failure, especially for these mild cases of an ankle sprain, which I'd say, the majority of them are. Very, very seldom use an immobilization procedure, because the biggest thing is they're going to be off of that foot for a while. When it's locked in that brace, things just get stiffer, and that healing is super delayed. And when they do eventually get out of that boot, if it's a couple weeks later, it is a super stiff ankle. And us working with that, it's like we're 2 weeks behind the curve.
Gotcha. And so I think I've heard both like using ice and heat or one or the other. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, again, going back to that Rice procedure, in terms of the icing stuff, like, it's back and forth. The research, again, is not great on ice. If an athlete feels like they need to numb the pain a little bit, like, that's what ice does. But what it's
Hmm.
not, is it does not help with any of the healing of the actual tissues. If anything, it's going to numb the area, provide that little bit of analgesia. So in that instance, I'm okay with athletes icing. But honestly, that might be for the first day or two just to kind of get things to settle down. But it needs movement, it needs blood flow to the area. So completely resting it and continuing to ice it is probably not the best course of action.
And so the third step, like you're talking about, the compression piece, and this is an ongoing debate at our basketball court anytime somebody twists an ankle, right? Half the guys are there telling him to relace his shoes even tighter, as tight as possible, and to keep it from swelling. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, listen, if something's immediately swelling, that's your body saying, get off of my ankle for right now. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not a time to lace up and push through pain just to play, because not that you're going to, but you have the potential to make the injury worse, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
say if you minorly tweaked it and your body's already having an immediate inflammatory response, it's a built-in signal to protect yourself. So when we try to overwrite those things, good things usually don't come about that. So telling somebody to just lace up and play through it probably would not be my advice. But like we were talking about before we came on here, this last ankle sprain that you had, was it a pretty bad one?
It was actually, I sprained it while I was playing some basketball and then pretty much off it for the day, just walking normally. And then the next day I had no pain. It was totally fine. I was back in action.
I played soccer my entire life. You played basketball your entire life.
Yeah.
If you could, can you even count on one hand how many ankle sprains you've had? You probably had a ton of them, right?
Yeah. Just a bunch here
Right.
and there over the years.
If they haven't been a super severe one, it's almost like a built-in adaptation, right? So it's almost like this built-in mechanism that we've adapted to the amount of times we sprained our ankles, and other things around us have tightened up to provide some security blanket. Like, my calves will probably never not be tight because it's
Mm-hmm.
just my body's way of compensating for the laxity that I've created with all these ankle sprains in my ankle. So our bodies are kind of master compensators. They will find a way to get done, and they will always find a way to find stability.
Yeah, so you're saying a lot of times we're overreacting and we can actually let our body do its work while also, like you said, paying attention to the signals that we're getting, whether it's swelling or anything like that.
Exactly. Your body's going to tell you probably exactly what needs to be done. Um, but here's the other thing too, is that I see when somebody does, let's just, take an athlete that has an ankle sprain like you had. What are they
Mm-hmm.
going to do? They're probably going to go to a general, practitioner, maybe a GP doc. And if they tell them or put them in a boot or a brace or immobilize them, honestly, what usually follows that is they say, take a week or two off and
Mm-hmm.
then start physical therapy. In that 2 weeks, that ankle gets so stiff because they haven't been moving it. And a lot of times when they prescribe these braces or, these ankle wraps, they don't give them a defined wear schedule. So
Mm.
the athlete's head or the parent's head, that just means just keep the brace on until you start physical therapy, right? So you can
Yeah.
imagine how stiff that ankle can get, all the tissues around it. Had pretty traumatic ankle sprains, like probably a grade 2, which is not crazy severe, but the effects of the injury were because of prolonged bracing, being in a
Mm-hmm.
boot for 8 weeks, and it almost kind of fused this one individuals that I can think of. It almost kind of fused their ankle. So
Wow.
there's a time and a place for immobilization, and it's probably not for these mild ankle sprains. So I would advocate for, as soon as that ankle sprain happens, if I can get that athlete in the next day for PT,
Mm-hmm.
we're starting right away, right? Early mobilization, early treatment, so that there's no time to let some of those secondary effects take place. Because we know how to handle the swelling situation. We can advise better than somebody just sitting at home and scouring the internet. And guess what? They're going to stumble upon that rest freaking
Yeah.
protocol. And like we talked about, it's super outdated at this point.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for checking out this video. DJ was definitely dropping some knowledge about rice, why it's outdated, what us athletes should do instead to best rehab an injured ankle. If you like the video, go ahead and like and subscribe. Make sure to check out DJ's content also on his Instagram pages. The links are in the description below. Again, thank you so much for checking out this video. See you all next time.